The Data Engineering Show is brought to you by FIREBOLT, the cloud data warehouse for AI apps and low-latency analytics. Get your free credits and start your trial at firebolt.io.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Data Engineering Show. Today, we're super happy to have Lisa Cao on. She's a product manager at DataStrato's, and she does AI, ML, product, partnerships, developer relations. Welcome to the show, Lisa. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Perfect. Do you want to give us a bit of context on what DataStrato does and what you do in your role for those of us who never heard of the company?
Yeah, so DataStrato is the company that originally created a project called Apache Gravitino. And Apache Gravitino was then donated to the ASF, as you can tell by sort of the name. And our company does sort of like these unique enterprise connectors that are part of it. For those of you who don't know Apache Gravitino, so it is a ASF incubating project that really looks at a meta lake, like catalog of catalog models, where you take this concept of, let's say we had one catalog that could inherit possibly from other catalogs and provide its own service. Could you then use that as a unified governance and security layer, right? And you can manage different things and you can have different applications pull from it. So happy to go more into that, but that's really the high level, like 10-second gist.
Right. How does something like Gravitino then compare to like Unity catalog of Databricks or like Polaris of Snowflake? Like, are these similar things? Are they different?
They are very similar, and it's really interesting because Gravitino was the first to actually release an Iceberg REST catalog service, and we ended up open sourcing that in 2020, early 2024 for the general community to use. And since then, we saw this lag that came out afterwards where, Polaris was then announced in open source and Unity catalog was open source too. So if you look at Unity catalog, it is, there's the proprietary version and there's the open source version. Generally speaking, we see a lot of support for the Databricks ecosystem. So Delta Lake, MLflow, and, this sort of jumping ground that they have to do their internal catalog and metadata management work. But when we're looking at the general open source ecosystem, there's still some kind of limited support that we see there. And I think the open source and the proprietary offerings can be very different, especially if you're coming in from a user perspective. Polaris is a project that came out of Snowflake, as many of you may know, and generally looks at the implementation of just the Iceberg REST catalog service. And of course, it has some really great features to kind of help interoperate within the Snowflake ecosystem. But for us, I would say if you're looking at using other engines like Trino, Spark, Flink, as well as other open table formats such as Hudi, Pymon, or even like structured data such as like connecting a JDBC catalog, doing Kafka schema registries, as well as unstructured data management. And in our newest 0.8 release, we include a model catalog too. There's a lot of like really rich, wide features that focus specifically on the open source stack.
What does like model catalog then mean in this context? This is not an Iceberg thing, right? Like that's like on top of the Iceberg. Like how does it connect?
I think that's really one of the interesting things is that we really are a little bit more than just the Iceberg catalog. And when you go deep into the rabbit hole, you're like, oh my gosh, what is all of this that they've done here just quietly in the background? So for us, model catalogs really is our first step into looking at how do we actually merge the two worlds of AI ML catalogs as well as the big data stack. And for us in 0.8, it really just looked at very basic model versioning that we wanted to have. So can we actually, register our models in our catalog? And then also, whether it's some sort of like sklearn model that you're bringing in, some sort of PyTorch model, and then being able to tag it and link it and enforce the same RBAC that you would with your other data assets that you're also using to even train the models, the file sets, right? And this is sort of the really end-to-end view that we have. And I think in the future, we're really looking to add much more rich, management of like even feature stores and, more diverse models that we'll have coming in. And that's the long-term vision for sure.
Gotcha. So it basically like becomes like a one-stop shop for both data and kind of models. So if I'm an ML team at a company, I can kind of go upload my training data kind of as an Iceberg table, access it within Gravitino. And then I can also go and kind of put the like 5 ML models my team trained over the past months and put them there as well in the version way, I guess. Is that accurate?
Yes. But I would also say that kind of the power of Gravitino is that you can not just have your Iceberg tables, but you can have it alongside your, MySQL server stores, as well as like even like a Kafka stream, and then train all of your data, by leveraging the metadata and federation capabilities of that layer. Really, it's a flexible model. And so because we're not trying to do every single catalog from scratch, there's a really large emphasis on the extensibility of the framework.
Okay, super interesting. On our end, as database internals nerds, we've been building Iceberg support like into kind of FIREBOLT. It's been fun going through different catalog implementations, which say, okay, they're REST catalog compliant, and seeing what actually works. It's been like a fun journey. So, okay, does Polaris work? Does Unity catalog work? Does Big Lake Meta kind of catalog work? So we haven't tried Gravitino yet, but I'll make sure to kind of talk to the team after the show, and we'll see if we can seamlessly read from that too.
Yeah, everything's kind of implemented in a way that's predictable, and that's supposed to be the point.
I have a question. So the only software in that stack that suffers is the database. The database needs now, these days, right? Databases always need to take care of the ecosystem, and the ecosystem evolved from supporting BI tools to ETL tools to ELT tools to now we're having the catalog revolution, where every now and then there is a new catalog coming out. Obviously, there is Iceberg that is a great way to access data, but as a database vendor, how do we access such a product, right? Because if you're telling us then we can, through your layer, access to the same Iceberg or the same abstraction, right? There are many table value functions in a database, okay? So if we can abstract some of that, so if companies are coming and saying, okay, so we are now going to take and use the same Iceberg concept, but beyond S3 or beyond a Snowflake, because it's amazing that Snowflake writes into Iceberg. That means you don't need to copy data out of Snowflake into different systems, into different ELT flows. You basically get Snowflake to be just a component within the flow. But then you have another system and another system. And so you want all of them to behave the same, but the catalogs don't match.
Yep. And so this is the value prop of Gravitino and why you would use it in your stack. I think that really we've become this antithesis of, like, of course, data silos, but also this idea that realistically you're just going to have one catalog to rule them all, and your team's going to have the discipline to use specifically one catalog. And so we go, okay, let's say one team is using Polaris and one team is using a separate catalog, and then maybe there's some stores that you don't have catalogs for. Can you create a layer that just kind of nicely sits on top of that and allows for that pluggability and evolution within your stack? So we're all very, very deep within the open source world, and we've seen, the evolution from, we support, before we got on Iceberg, the main catalog that we supported was Hive Metastore. So a lot of companies, they're still using Hive Metastore as the backbone for a lot of their systems. And now you're implementing that alongside Iceberg, alongside your relational stores and your file sets. And you now have this tons of like unstructured data, right? These actual files and multimodal data that you have to manage alongside it. And as you're training all of your generative AI applications, your chatbots, your RAG frameworks, you're accessing many different data stores at the same time. So your relational stores, maybe some sort of Postgres database, as well as your files. And so how do you enact the same governance on all of that, right? Just from a technical level, how do you actually make that data accessible, but not just that, but governed at the same time? So really, this is the idea of pluggability and extensibility. I think one of the things that our team has really conceded on is it's going to change over time. We just know it's going to change over time. It's never the same. And people want to try new tools, especially when you're converging the big data stack, heavily Java-based, and does not change with this extremely fast-moving AI ML stack where there's a new tool every single week and there's no way that you can help it, right? And so one of the things that we've really done to help facilitate this is a push-down permission management model. And so let's say that you have, GCP or AWS that's using IAM for your object store. And then you also have, some sort of internal system, or you maybe are using MySQL, and that also has its own permission management system. You have SQL-based policies that you have, or path-based policies. how do you actually manage all of this without individually configuring every single freaking catalog, because it's going to be painful. And so what we do is that we create a layer on top of that where we have a unified RBAC system that then translates into the lower systems that we manage and that you've connected. And so there's very specific things that we support right now, but generally speaking, it's pretty wide and common in terms of what we do support. And then let's say you have a machine learning team that wants to do all this training, and through Gravitino's Python client, they're going to, bring in all of these different files or different data, and they don't want to think about the access. They don't want to think about how to access. They just want to think about, okay, just plug it in, REST, whatever. The infrastructure team can then manage all of that from Gravitino and then go, okay, this is what you can access from a row and column based level. This is the tagging that we're going to have. This is the governance that we have in place. And we know that, because it's a very technical catalog, we support very specific query engines, but the widely supported ones, right? In the open ecosystem. And because it's open source and it's like Apache ecosystem first, you're going to see that longevity that you might not see with the other catalogs right now.
Gotcha. But then in terms of this authentication aspect, right? It's like you're also, let's take the kind of Iceberg REST protocols, for example. Like I can connect to Gravitino and speak to it with the Iceberg REST protocol. Like you're kind of stuck with the security model of that, right? Because if you don't adapt to the security model of that protocol, kind of you're not going to be able to then actually integrate with the tool that speak Iceberg REST. So how exactly does that work then? It's like, are there authentication parts of Iceberg REST protocol already that you can kind of piggyback onto? Do you make sure that security works at like the file level? Like, can you go a bit? I'm not sure I really get it, to be honest.
Yeah. So let's take, for example, two different systems that we'll have, or, three even. So you might have AWS IAM. You might have MySQL's also privileged system. And Iceberg itself also has its own privilege system. Even with other open table formats, you have their own privilege system like Hudi, et cetera. And so the amount that you define in terms of the fine grain aspects of that at the file level, you really have to do Iceberg's not going to do that. I'm going to be completely honest with you. So you have to do it in the catalog level above that, that you're actually implementing and connecting to as part of the spec, right? And so generally speaking, all of these different roles that you have and different permissions that you have to be sorted and consolidated in some sort of way. And so what Gravitino does is that it takes these common layers between them and goes, okay, if somebody wanted to perform this operation uniformly across different systems, how could we make it so? And then implement that engine side as well. And some of the examples of the ways that we do that is that in our layer, we do the credential vending, we do the, role policy management, and we also help you define the policies that you want as well at the row and column level, so that you can kind of have a very common experience between all of them.
So in a way, not the only way, but in a way, you can go and say, okay, I have a data sitting in MySQL with a certain set of permissions and users, and then assuming MySQL is the only data it's serving. And then you have another system having its own permission system and users, again, assuming those users are only being served on that system. And now you have two systems. Users do not always, right? Permissions and privileges do not always match between them. But when you're building a new app and you want to use both tables from both systems and you want to build one solution on top of them or introduce a model into that basket, then you want to build one permission system that it's for the purpose of serving that only app on top of everything. It's using your layer. In a way, it can ignore even ignore sometimes the long tail of permissions and things that are happening within the specific data stores, and actually just to push down, right? So if I'm a user and I'm clicking on something or asking a question, and that question or action needs to get translated into 3 queries across 3 sources, then there's, right, the user that accesses the system is me on that top layer. What's happening underneath is not interesting. So I think it's an amazing thing to have, especially now that everyone every database and everything that generates data, every stream of data has a catalog attached to it now. So having that on top, interesting to see kind of approaching the problem from like building it from scratch on the top catalog.
Yes, and you summarized it amazingly. I mean, we should hire you as a dev role. Good job. And I think one of the really cool aspects of this too is that when we think about data access these days, like of course we think about our data analysts and we think about our reports and our BI generation, but we're also having to look at the automated and future forward facing side of things. I think, MCP right now, the model context protocol that's out, has kind of shown us that context engineering is this really next big wave of big data. And how do we actually serve context to data agents, to RAG frameworks, and of course, governance is a really big part of this. It actually very much annoys me that there's so many of these connectors without really these things in mind. And so let's say that you have some sort of agent that wants to access your data, you need to really be able to define what it can and can't access. And you have to do that in a layer that is manageable, right? There's no way that you're going to be able to have agents access all of this data in all of these heterogeneous systems without really thinking about how you're going to have a layer to manage that at the metadata level is really important.
Amazing. Okay, now we're done with the introduction. Now we can start the podcast. Benjamin, please go and start asking. So what's ahead? Like, what is the team working on? So it's an open source community. What do you want to share with the community about what's next?
Yeah, generally speaking, I think that for us, we're really looking at gaining more consistency across all of our systems. So I think one of the issues with having such a wide project, and it really is a wide one, is being able to know, exactly who's using our product, or at least in the open source, who's deploying in production and who's not. And of course, I think that that's really important to see more users come up. We're always welcoming more issues. We have a ton of activity on our repo. If you look at our repo, it's a little bit scary sometimes, just to see how many people are contributing and active that are outside of, our internal starting community. But generally, I think one of the things that to really look forward to is, of course, Kubernetes native deployment. So we're really going to be focusing on cloud native as sort of our next step. And within our roadmap, really making that model management more extensible and make more sense, right? Especially in terms of, if I'm an ML engineer coming in, can I use the Gravitino Python client and register everything and access everything that I want to without thinking about the big data side? I think that we've done a really great job at supporting the really large query engines that we, have meant to, such as Spark, Flink, Trino, etc., and supporting
all the old legacy stuff.
Don't say that.
That's how you start the journey, right? You need the tests, you need the table stakes, you go to exactly.
Yeah, well, that's one of the big issues with tools these days. It just assumes that data infrastructure, folks are going to adopt the newest tool. It's like, that's not how it happens. It's always going to be side by side. You're never going to get rid of the old stuff. So just concede that you've lost and then accept it. But we do want to really allow folks to, manage their data sets more efficiently, manage their file sets more efficiently, and connect that further with the open source ecosystem that we see in Apache.
So if I'm a data engineer and running on Snowflake and I want to try out a new system, I've already put Iceberg in place. So everything is safe. My data pipeline is running. And I want to switch. I want to switch query engine. I want to go to Spark. I want to go to BigQuery. I want to go to FIREBOLT. Right? Having something like that, would that help me as a data engineer?
Yes. And we have teams that use Gravitino in production who use both Trino and Spark side by side because it's all configured in the same way. And that's really what was kind of the main basis of the project initially is, if you have teams that are using different query engines, can you make sure that you're enforcing governance equally across all of them and that the behavior is predictable?
Right. And the whole promise of this now open ecosystem and catalog revolution, right, is that you can basically mix and match query engine and choose the best one for your specific workload. Best one meaning price, performance, whatever. So I think like there's just such an interesting change kind of in the dynamics of the data infrastructure space, because all of a sudden you're not locked into a specific system anymore. You actually have optionality, and kind of it's just about whatever is best for your specific workload.
Yes, everybody wants control over their compute and storage now as separate decoupled layers. And we've also seen shift left, of course, gaining a lot of traction as well. And I think this is really the era for interoperability, for flexibility, for open source ecosystem. Whereas before it was a lot of performance benchmarking that we were obsessed with. But now we have to know, okay, how do we actually use this and maintain it, right?
Now it's performance benchmarking on Iceberg.
Yes.
Remember Hadoop? We need this, we need that, we need that, we need to move, we need to switch, we need to cut and paste. Boom, you ended up getting a snowflake, okay? But exactly. It all goes in cycles, and now we're back. Little details matter, flexibility matters. That's just life with the data. And everything is moving, like data is moving faster than anything else. There's no kind of right vertical that it's just moving so fast, and everything needs to keep on running. So having your catalog strategy, having your catalog knowledge, and using the latest and greatest is amazing. And I'm super grateful, really, for you to come over and make us smarter and more educated. Especially Benjamin, he needed that as well.
Especially me, I need some education in this space.
Exactly.
So talking about education, by the way, is like one thing that I always find like daunting in this space is just how fast it's moving, right? Like how do you basically stay on top of it? Like, how can you make sure kind of that you follow the news, the most recent developments? Like, what should our listeners be, other than a data engineering show, of course, where they learn all of this anyways, be listening to, reading, etc.?
I think that there's a really big risk of burning out in this space when you're trying to constantly learn everything new. And so when you're seeing all of these different tools come out, the way that I approach it, and this is just the way that my brain works, is you have to do pattern matching. You have to think, why are all of these catalogs coming out? And they're all kind of trying to solve the same problem, but in different ways, right? It's access, it's governance, it's, management. And really, you can go deep dive into the specific tools that you have, but generally speaking, it's not going to be useful for you if it doesn't match your specific use case and your problem that you're trying to solve. Going into very deeply like why and how DeepSeek is so performant is fun, but if you're trying to do that every single tool that you have, it's just going to burn you out. And so you have to think, okay, why are people so ready and primed to have better performing models, right? It's because it's expensive. This is the real crux of the issue. And so and any way that we can make it cheaper is really what's going to provide value within the ecosystem over time. I would say, generally speaking, because of the way social media works these days, any tool that comes out now can really be amplified in terms of its messaging. And so you don't actually know quite yet who's adopting what in production. It's very easy to have a tool and go, okay, everybody's using this and it has all these features, but you don't actually know who is using it on the enterprise level. And that's really important. That's kind of the litmus test for me. And as we see more user stories come out, like go through the testimonials and go through who's using what, instead of just like there's a whatever short on this or there's a LinkedIn post, there's a graphic that makes it look sexy.
In terms of like meetups, like are there any specific meetups you would recommend people kind of go to, also virtual ones? Is this something you do, for example?
Yes. So I have to do my obligatory plug here for the San Francisco meetup that I run called Data for AI. And it's called the Open Source After Party. So every single talk that we have is purely open source, and it's mostly geared towards senior and like architect level data engineers, ML engineers. And it's really because there's a lot of like vendor sales pitches out there that just don't get into the meetup, the architecture. And that's something I found really unsatisfying. I also want to plug Data Day Texas, actually. Data Day Texas is hosted by Lynn Better. It is also vendor neutral, and it is one of the most high value conferences that you can have if you haven't been. Joe Reese is like a huge proponent of the conference as well.
Nice. He's a former guest on the podcast, so we know Joe well.
That guy has been everywhere. There's no way he's not appeared on at this point. I would say that those two, to keep it simple and just go to the places that are high value.
Awesome. Eldad, do you have anything you want to know about catalogs that we haven't chatted about yet?
I'm complete. That's it.
You know everything
I'm
now.
done. I know everything that I didn't know before. So,
At least that, but I've learned a lot, yes.
Same here. So you wanted to say something, Lisa?
Yes, I wanted to plug if you're at the Iceberg Summit coming up, or if you had just been, I know that they're running virtual sessions as well. DataStrato's CTO and also one of the release managers for Apache Gravitino is going to be giving a talk at Iceberg Summit alongside Pinterest. So they've been using us in production, and they've been using us to manage their iceberg tables.
Very
so
nice.
it's a very deep technical dive. I think a lot of this stuff is going to be geared towards specifically iceberg engineers. So we're definitely not going to be skipping out on any of the details and implementation. So
nice. That's cool. Iceberg engineer is also nice. Has like a nice ring to it, actually. Cool. So, Lisa, it was great having you on the show. Seriously, like Eldad and I kind of weren't data catalog experts before. We're still not, but we moved one level up. So we're excited to follow kind of the work you're doing and seeing how kind of open catalogs evolve. Thanks a lot for being on the show. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.
thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Awesome.
The Data Engineering Show is brought to you by FIREBOLT, the cloud data warehouse for AI apps and low latency analytics. Get your free credits and start your trial at firebolt.io.